Part 2.
There you go.
And I better take my hat off because this hat is from the first fighter group that they donated to me. So I have put that on. We missed all about Tunis, Brazil, and Sicily, and Italy. So I have to, my daughter asked me to continue it. So that's what I'm doing. I told you about Africa. I lived on dates and hardtack. Well, there was a few other things I had. I had frog legs. Now, frog legs were little streams, mud holes, I should say. And we'd take our rifle and shoot at them, and they'd blast them all apart. So we learned to about 6 inches below them when they'd fly up in the air about 30 feet, and we'd pick them up and they were stunned. So we have frog legs. And the other thing I had was mountain oysters. Never had them before. And the French, I guess they're famous for the French. And we used to eat those. And then eggs was always a barter thing. What it would do is the Arabs would get them. They're actually mattress covers, and they would cut a hole in the top and 2 armpits, and they'd wear them that way. And they're very valuable, but you only got one, so for a couple dozen eggs, that's the other thing we used to eat. But it soon would be over with when you had a couple dozen eggs, because you ate a dozen at a time anyway. And the town, I forgot the name of it, was Bizerta. It was a town in Tunis, and it was loaded with ships. That's where all our food supplies came in, and there was a lot of guns around there. And we were waiting for the invasion of Sicily. And in Sicily, after we captured Sicily, they decided that the war wasn't going fast enough, so they invaded about near Rome, south of Rome. And at that time, we flew over to Sicily, and Sicily was a couple towns. One was Syracuse, and the other one was can't think of the name of it. And it was eastern coast, and right at the base of Mount Etna. At night, we would lay there in our little square boxes, which were made out of belly tanks. They were about 2 by 2 by 6 foot long, and we would just take the end off and sleep inside of one of those. And that was and it was just temporary. But at night, we'd watch Mount Etna spruce out that straight, maybe 15, 20 feet of fire. And it was very interesting. And we flew out of there probably a couple months, and then after the invasion of Anzio, we went back to Africa, stayed there a while, and escorted our P-38s to escort of B-17s. And that was day and night, and we slept with our airplanes. It was a long day. Sometimes you get up 4 o'clock in the morning, put on belly tanks, or then they'd change their mind and have to put a 500-pound bomb on. It was always something to do, and besides the maintenance. And we'd have to warm up the engines every morning. And a lot of times we'd just fall asleep inside and after we warmed them up, we shut them down go to sleep again. Maybe a couple hours, somebody else would come up and wake us up. And it was very different. You never knew what was going to happen. You get orders the night before, and by the next morning it was changed. That seemed to be the census all the time. And after getting back to Africa, we went on the beach. We had a couple days off, so we went to the beach, which wasn't very far. And about 15, 20 of us went on a truck and went there for the day. And one guy, well, there's nobody on the beach but us, and what happened is that we all got sunburned, and one guy had a sunburn on his Peter, and it was very hurtful. And the two people, it was rumored, we don't know this for sure, and we're swimming at dusk. And they said, once you get out there in the water at dusk, the inland and the ocean all look the same. So they swam the wrong way and they drowned. So instead of coming to shore, they went out into the ocean. So they were mixed up. And two people died there. And then after they captured Sicily, we decided to go to I can't think of the name of the place. Sardinia. And there we went on LSDs, and I was afraid of submarines, German submarines. So I got in a truck and slept in the cab. So I had all iron around me, and I felt a lot safer. And so we got there, and we rode to Calgary is the town. And what happened there is that for a couple of weeks they dropped leaflets to the people in town saying that we're going to bomb the docks. Well, the Americans, what they usually do is bomb the docks and go right into town. The town surrounds the docks, so what happened is the Germans kept everybody, wouldn't let anybody out of town. They figured we wouldn't bomb them, but we did. And they killed a lot of people. And the town, as we went through the town, it stunk pretty bad. And the airfield was on the north of the town, so we were out there. And we flew out of there and escorted. We had a German base. It was a German base. It was all made up for us already. There were a few incidents that happened there that was interesting. We decided to go on a hunting trip, and went north into the mountains, and we surrounded the mountains, and people were banging everything at the bottom, making noise and making them, the sheep and the deer. And I had about 6 shots at a mountain glow. I don't know if I got it or not, but we left right away. So, and when we got into town, the town surrounded us, and they thought we were bringing food or something for them to eat. They were in a starvation diet. In fact, back at the base, the kids would come in to see the doctor because he had fat belly and scabs on their legs, and from nutrition, they didn't have enough to eat. And one thing we did for them, at the end of the chow line, which might have been about 50 feet long, we standing up, and at the end there was garbage cans, and we used to dump all the stuff we had left over into the garbage cans and warm it up and make soup for the kids, and the people in town would come in and join us. And another thing they did for us in town, we would give them the flour to a lot of the people there, and they had little ovens out in the backyard, and they would bake fresh bread for it. Boy, was that good. you know, from a starvation in Africa, another starvation there, so there wasn't much to eat at all. And another interesting thing that happened, this kid was about 12 years old, and he came to our tent, and he had the slingshot. And as a kid, I used to use the slingshot myself. And he shows us how he used to eat. And he'd go out and he'd get a sparrow with his slingshot. He'd shoot it down, and he'd build a little fire, probably a foot around. And then when the ashes got gray, he would take the bird, the whole bird, and just throw it in there, and then keep turning it with a stick until it was roasted, and then he would he would eat it all, every single bit of it, and it looked pretty tasty. I was kind of surprised, and so everything we had we'd give it to him, even clothes. So, and another thing that happened, we were there with Italians. The Italians had surrendered, but they still in army uniforms and everything, and they we would see them, and there's one family wanted to see somebody, so Nick and I went in there, and they had two beautiful girls. They're probably under 15, 16 years old, and they would feed us wine and they're from Sicily. I was kind of surprised, and they were on this island. I didn't know what the father was doing. And we spent quite a few nights there, and we'd drink wine and look at the pretty girls, but no touchy, you know. And one night on the way back, it was probably a mile or 2 miles, we were walking back, Nick and I, and these two soldiers kept on bothering us, and they were drunk too, and we were. So, and then one guy popped me, because I was small. Nick was about 6'3", and he was really strong. And he said, "I'll take this guy, you take that guy." So I start hitting this guy, and he was hitting me back, and all at once, my arms got so tired, I couldn't lift them anymore. I said, "Hey, Nick, I can't fight anymore." And Nick comes over, and the other guy was following him. They were on the one that he was fighting with. Nick threw one punch and hit the other guy, and they both fell in the ditch. The ditch was about 6 foot deep. It was a ditch for water, and we went off laughing. Nobody hurt, but I don't think there was anybody hurt anyway. It's just one of those instances that happens. Well, there's one other thing that happened that I was watching this airplane, and he had only one engine. I said, "Oh, he's in trouble." And it wasn't very high. He was coming in for a landing at the other end of the airport. And then I see the other engine get feathered. I said, "Geez, they're both engines." And he landed about halfway down the runway, and I saw he was in trouble. And at the end of the runway, there was what happened, they used to make fences out of stones and bricks and anything they could find. That was their fence. And it was about 8 feet high, and it was probably 10 feet wide. And he was coming right to the end, and all at once he pulls up his wheels because he was going to hit that wall. And he didn't want to, and I start running out there. It was only about 150 feet. And I start running out there, and I said, "Oh, he must be hurt." So I jumped on the airplane, and I tried to pull him out. And he was kind of bloody on the face. And the airplane the props were off of it, and there were white stuff coming out. I couldn't figure it. I said, "Oh, geez, that must be gasoline coming out." I said, "He feathered his engine, so he must not have any gas." So anyway, I went ahead, and I tried to pull him out. I couldn't pull him out. And Big Red Headington comes around. He was about 6'5", and he get away. And I went on the other side of it, and he tried to pull him out, and the voice was around his neck, a recorder, and it was stuck. So I pulled all that off him, and Nick finally got him out, and by that time the meat wagon, the ambulance was there, and they hauled him away, and I don't know whatever happened to him. And I got the Silver Star, not the Silver Star, but the Bronze Star for that. And it wasn't much, but it could have been worse. That's all. The airplane didn't explode or anything like that, but you never know. And from there, we went back to, then Italy was being fought over, so it was a Christmas Day, I remember that, and we were on a boat. We docked at Naples, and we get into this place, and it was about 3 o'clock or something like that in the Sunday, Christmas Day afternoon, and he didn't want to. The captain didn't want to give us anything to eat. It's all shut down, and we argued like mad, and we really got mad about that. He didn't want to give us anything to eat. We hadn't eaten all day, we were on the boat. And finally he gave to it. But what happens, he kept us there to unload boats. That was our job, to unload boats. So the boats would come ashore, and then we'd unload them and put them on trucks, and they'd haul the food away. It was all food. And there were 6 gallon in each box, and there was fruit in there and vegetables and ketchup. Oh, when we saw ketchup. Oh, and the other thing was dehydrated onions, and we hadn't seen anything like the ketchup or that. And oh man, so what we did, every truck had to be checked in and out by the MPs. So we lined the whole bottom of the truck with all these cartons, and it was kind of rainy and it was bad weather, so we had pockers on, and we just covered everything out. And there must have been about 10 of us on the truck. So when we left, we had that whole truck full of cans of eats. So we went all the way across the mountains to the other coast, the Adriatic, which was it was kind of mountainous roads, and they're not very wide. It's hardly get two trucks through at one time. One would have to pull sort of off of it and go very slow around it. It was very dangerous, and probably about 5-hour drive or something like that. So when we got back there, we opened those cans. Half of it was fruit, and half was ketchup, I think, and then we could mix the ketchup with the some of it was coffee. We got coffee too, and it was interesting to see something like that. And you open those cans. We just get a screwdriver, poke it in, and then rip the thing open with a pair of pliers. We didn't have any can openers, so, and we ate good for about a week. And there we stayed for about a year and a half, and on the east coast of Italy, and we were hammered down over the winter, and not much to do in the wintertime because conditions are very bad. And then we didn't have any buildings. We had a tent. That's all we lived in, this tents. And one big tent for the kitchen and stuff like that. But everything is inadequate. And it was hard living. And it actually snowed in Foggia, Italy. And that was kind of unusual, everybody said. We had about an inch or two of snow, and it evaporated anyway, so it didn't matter. Now this is like probably the most time we spent in one spot. About a year and a half there, and in that. We went to other bases, but that one base we stayed at for about a year and a half. And the duty got better, and the food got a lot better. And one reason why the food got a lot better, we had Italians. They weren't at war anymore, so we had them Italian prisoners, and they did all our cooking and hair cutting and just took care of us. So it made life a lot easier. And they knew I was Italian, and I didn't know how to speak Italian. I could understand what they were saying, but I could never hardly. So they had to learn English. It was pretty interesting. And one incident that happened there, this one guy said, "I haven't seen my sister for about," and I was going to go to Rome. And he says, "Can you stop and see her? She was a nun." And I says, "Well, I certainly will." So now we'll have to go back a little, because living with those Italian prisoners, they had stories how, like in Africa, they didn't have any water. They had to drink their own pee. I couldn't believe it. And they said, they convinced me that they did. So that's how they lived. And they had a hard time. And the Germans treated them like dogs. So they hated the Germans because they treated them so bad. And their life there with us, I guess they enjoyed it. Because they enjoyed, they were around all the food they want, they eat, and then they were still prisoners, but they weren't actually prisoners. I used to talk to them every day, and one of them was from northern Italy, and the other ones I don't know where they're from, but he could understand the Italian dialect that I had, so he could say a few words in it, so it was interesting talking to him. But they would learn English pretty fast, and they treated us really good. Although they were prisoners, but they make up their meals, and we ate good. The first time since we left the United States, we really ate good. So, and there was no KP duty anyway. So without KP duty, nobody had to work in the kitchen, and the kitchen was hard work. And we flew a lot of missions out of there. One of the worst missions was they were going to police the oil fields. And what happened really is they were going to drop these bombs on the oil fields and knock out the oil supply to the Germans. But they tried to bomb it several times, but they had it too well protected, and the airplanes would go, the bombers get all shot up and everything. And what happened this day was slaughter for us, because somebody had a talk on the radio, and they found that they were flying treetop all the way over, so the Germans couldn't pick up the airplanes, and it was a big raid, and it was all fighters, the P-38s, the two groups. There's probably about 100 planes up that day, and the bombs were delayed, so the first one would go in there and they wouldn't explode right away until the last one. But most of them had to drop their bombs wherever they were and fight the Germans. One pilot got 5 German airplanes, but we lost a lot of airplanes, and yeah, it wasn't, and we didn't hurt the airfield. The oil fields that much. So it was one of those things that happened, and it was a good idea, but it didn't work out. So, and then my brother Marty came over to see me. He was in airplanes, with the airplanes in C-47s in Naples. So we got together, and that morning we were going to fly to Rome. And what happened is one of the P-38s was going on a mission, and he forgot to open his flaps for his oil coolers, and it burned up the airplane, and he flew in, and it crashed and burned. So for some reason, I wanted to see who it was, because it might have been one of our pilots. And so I went over and looked at it, looked in the ambulance there, and he looked at me. And I to this day, I can see him. He was all black, just about black, and his skin was, you know how clay gets when it dries up, those cracks? That's what it looked like, and it was oozing out blood. And one thing I wished I never looked at. It was one of the things that impressed my mind so bad that I just wished I never seen it. So Marty says, "We're not flying. Get a Jeep." So I got a Jeep. We went to Rome. Rome was nice duty. It's just the Germans didn't bomb it. It was one of those open cities that they made an agreement they wouldn't bomb it. So it was pretty nice in Rome. And one of the things we did get to see is the Pope. Pope, we had an audience with the Pope, about maybe 100 soldiers. And he came in and talked to us, and I don't know what he talked about. Anyhow, it was something, how he came in. He was on there's 6 guys carrying him, and it was like a basket. He sat on top of it, and he was waving at us as he went by. And they had him, 6 guys there, and they were on his shoulders, the platform that he sat on, and these 6 guys carried him in, and then I think they were the guards, because they're all dressed up in the guard uniform. And then after the speech, he was sitting there on a bench, and he asked us to come in and talk to him, and we did, and we kissed his ring, and I guess he was not a war man. I guess he got criticized for that. You know, he was working with the Germans, but he didn't want Rome to get bombed, and it never did. So he did one good thing. So he did that right, but there's not much good. I've never heard any good words about him at all. Pope Pius XII, that was who it was. And from there, it was coming near, the Germans were north of Rome then, and then they decided they're going to invasion of southern France. So that we went to the other island, Corsica. Yeah, I think it was Corsica, yes. And the incidents there, we flew a lot of missions, because for the invasion of southern France, they had to bomb a lot and fighter and strafe a lot of places. So a lot of bombing and strafing. And for the invasion of France, southern France, it was a little later than the invasion of northern France. And nobody knows about it as much as we did, because we were in that part of it. And there was very little publicity about it. So we, one night, they were coming back, and it was a scary night. Not night, it was just dusk, I should say. And they had to put up 2 lights at the end of the runway, and they're beacon lights. They're very strong, and the pilots knew that. But what happened, the pilots start coming in, it was okay, and then it raised a lot of dust, and the next pilots start coming in. The dust is about 10 or 20 feet higher than the runway. So they thought that was the runway, and they let down and crash one after another. You couldn't believe how bad it was. And then with the crashes there, they couldn't land. I don't know whatever happened to them. So we lost a lot of airplanes there. And the other incident they had there, B-17 was coming in. They were carrying some troops and stuff, and they crashed. 17 were killed on it. That was a disaster right there. And there was a stream right next to where we had our tents set up, and that's where we got our water, and we got our with a swimming hole. That's what we enjoyed. And it was warm then, so a nice swimming hole we had. We were in that just about half the day. You know, when the airplane take off, we'd go over there and go swimming. And being clean like that was kind of unusual because water was always a shortage wherever we went. And the tanker trucks used to haul gasoline and other stuff. They always be full of water because the water was a precious commodity and hard to live without. And finally, near the end of the war, when everything was going good and their living conditions, you know, out of these belly tank crates, we made houses out of them. You know, there'd be a bungalow for 4 people to sleep in, had a roof on it and everything. It was really good living. And we went back to, after the invasion, we went back to Foggia, and they decided to move further north, Louisiana, and so we went there for a while. And then the other thing is we were near a reservoir where there was ducks and geese, and they'd fly over our campsite just before dusk with sometimes to be about 20 or 30 geese coming in, gliding in, not very high. So we decided we were going to have some geese. So I had a carbine. Oh, yeah, we all had carbines then. Oh, a couple they had no shotguns. So we hid behind a ditch just before the landing, so they were only about 20 feet high. And so we're sitting there hidden, and just as soon as this first crop comes over, everybody let loose. There's feathers all over the sky. You couldn't believe it. And not one goose fell down. Not one. There was about 5 of us there. We were shooting the heck out of them things. Couldn't bring one down. They might have died by shotgun, I mean, later on, but we never got any. So that was interesting. And when they brought in an F-80 airplane, this would tee us off. You know, here we are 3 years in Europe during the war and all that, and they bring a new airplane, first jet airplane, and they wouldn't let us within 100 feet of it. We wanted to touch it, wanted to see it, we wanted to know all about it, because Germans had the jets already, and we didn't have any, and this was the first one that the Americans made. It was really slick and everything. And they it bothered us. You know, we being in a war and you get a lot of bad treatment, and then have somebody do that to you. It's just like, this is the Army. So what else could you do? You know? And we finally, the war was near the end, and all at once in May sometime, they said the war was over. And, you know, after being every day, you had to go up the airplanes, you had to do this, you had to do that. Now you're busy all the time. And then all at once they said, no flying. Nobody would go up and fly. I said, what's going on here? So we just said, okay. And then he said, get ready to go home. So we got all dressed in our uniforms. And guess what? 3 weeks before here we think we're going to leave the next day and fly out of there. No. And the best part of it, we had to go all the way to Naples because we were going to go home on a boat instead of an airplane. And we sat around and just joked about everything, and it was a good time, and got a lot of names of people who wanted to see later and all this. And there was a lot of pictures taken at that time. Now the war's over, we're going home. It's hard to believe. And then we get on this big boat, USS America, and it was a passenger boat, and it was a big one. And they you know, people want to bring souvenirs home. And guess what? They said, no souvenirs. And I had a camera, and it had a good lens on it and everything, and I said, I'm not going to give up this. So I put it on the bottom of my pack, and my pack was about, you carried it on your shoulders, and it was about 3 foot long and about an inch and a foot and a half wide, and you just packed everything you had in that thing, and you could carry it around, and you could close it up and be waterproof and everything. So I brought it home. You know, they didn't examine anything. They told you had to sign papers and all that, you know. But I think most everybody got a lot of brought guns home. I didn't want any good guns. I had owned about four handguns, but I could never hit anything with them. The only one that I thought was pretty good was a German P-38. It was the same as our airplane. I could really shoot with that one. Then I traded that off for a Beretta, 9mm. It was a nice small gun. I thought, boy, this is going to be nice. And you know what? You couldn't hit anything with that thing. It didn't have any power. It didn't have any. It was only a 9mm and a small bullet. So that wasn't very good. So we got on this boat, and guess what? We hit a hurricane off the Florida coast. And, we were going into Norfolk, but this was the Florida coast that we hit this hurricane. And it was really miserable. You know, I was my cot was at the bottom of the boat, and I was supposed to be sleeping on the top, which was 7. There were 7 of us in a row. Oh, so I got out of there because the boat was rocking all over the place. I went on the back end of it, and I felt good back there because all you'd see is sea and water, and it was really rough. And so I had to go to the toilet. I had to go inside, and there's about 4 inches of water or puke or anything else. I don't know, everything, vomit. You know, just the place was miserable. I smelled that, and I got sick. So couldn't eat nothing. And finally we got into Norfolk, Virginia, and after that, you know, you couldn't eat because you can't get over seasickness. It seems like it sticks with you. It's worse than air sickness, I think, because it's constant. You get in there, and we're all on one side of the boat, and they said, get off that side. We're at like a 45-degree angle. Everybody wanted to see the United States, you know. Everybody's anxious to get off the boat, so we had to move around the boat and get on the other side. And finally got off of it, and they they were feeding us steaks. And guess who was our, the people who were doing all the cooking and waiters and all that were Germans, German prisoners of war. And they would laugh at us. Say, we got out of the war, we got a good duty here, you know, they talk pretty good English. I guess they were there for a long time, you know, and they were razzing us. So, and we had, you know, it's a funny thing, you have a prejudice against Germans. And I had it, just I think everything else, you know, don't go to hell and all that, you know. And got over that. And finally put us on a train and went to Great Lakes, got discharged. At the discharge, this captain tried to talk me into staying. And I said, hell no, I ain't gonna stay, you know, I want to get out of this. And then he says, well, get in the reserves. You got to get in the reserve. You got to sign these papers. I told him to go to hell. He said, you know who you talking to? And I said, oh, I'm talking to somebody that has no brains, you know. And so he saw I wasn't giving in, so he gave up. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to get out of there one way or another. So I finally signed the papers, and that was in June. Exactly about 5 years that I was in the service, and 3 years overseas. So I had my fill of it, and I didn't want any more to do with it. And I've been against war, and I'll always be against war, because nobody wins. Everybody loses. And I know that the war is the very last thing you have to do. Yeah, I don't think you ever have it. I think you can negotiate everything. So I give my president right now, I'm 94, and I give my president a lot of credit for trying to keep out of war. So, and it's about the end. I had a hard time adjusting when I got home. My stomach was nervous. Well, I always had trouble with my stomach. It was always a nervous stomach, and I shook, but I enjoyed being home. And it wasn't for my wife. After I met my wife at a couple days before, let's see. Well, I say it's about, I was only home about 2 or 3 weeks. And Joe, I forgot his last name, he came along once and he said, he picked me up and he says, hey, come on with me. I said, where are you going? He says, I'm going to meet a girl and there's another girl there I want you to talk to. So he said, I said, where they at? And he said, no park. I said, okay, I'll go with you. So I went with him and we met another girl and Helen. And I said, and Helen looked at me and I didn't look, I looked at her and, you know, we didn't hit it off. We played a little tennis together and that was about it. And Helen was a nice looking girl, you know, but I don't know, we didn't click it off, so she didn't pay much attention to me either, so I guess. And then, maybe a month or so later, I'm downtown and I was in a car and I see her in the corner and I said, hey, stay there, I'm gonna come back. And you know what? She stayed there and waited for me. I went around the block and talked to her, walked her home. She was a cadet nurse. The Army had hold of her. She was a cadet nurse in the service. She was at St. Joe's Hospital in Joliet. And I walked her home and she says, I made another date with her then. So I got around Helen and you know what? My nervousness and everything I got over it. And it was a funny thing, you know, you get a little bit of it later, but then you start thinking, well, Helen's a nice girl, you know, and all that, you know. I got interested in her, and she got interested in me, and so we sort of dated off and on, not real steady yet. So she graduated in 1947, this is in 45, so she was, the only thing I didn't like, I'd eat supper, and we'd have a date at 7 o'clock at night. And she said, let's go eat in a restaurant. I guess the food was pretty bad at St. Joe's Hospital. And she always wanted to eat chicken. I never seen a woman eat chicken like her. And chicken eater. And she knew how to pick all the meat off the bones and everything. I couldn't believe how well she could eat chicken. So that's what she did. We'd always go to chicken. And the chicken place was, I always remember it. It was either at Steffnage's or this one place out near Plainfield on Route 30, just near the cemetery right there. All I remember was a lot of windows. I can't remember the name of it. We usually end up there, usually with another nurse and another guy. So it was interesting. Then I worked for Texaco. Well, no, the first job I got was Electromotive. And it was 3:42, I think, we'd start, and two something in the morning would be off. I worked there a week, and they expect you to be right there. You couldn't go to the toilet and when you wanted, and and it was so regimented, I couldn't believe it. So I got my check that Saturday. Well, they paid pretty good. The check was pretty good. I don't know how much it was, but it paid more than the places I looked. Most places paid 90 cents an hour, and they paid better than that. But it was kind of boring work. We were putting coolers on top of cars, railroad cars, passenger cars, I should say, and they would have you do, it was kind of, you couldn't, I told the girl, I said, I don't like this job, I'm quitting. She said, you can't quit. I said, yeah, okay, I can't quit, but I won't be here Monday. So I guess them times that you couldn't quit a job, you can't change jobs, I guess that's the government one for you, but I never went back. Then finally I took a job at Texaco because my brother worked there. And he's the only brother out of 5 brothers, he's the only brother that didn't go to war. So he had 2 kids and he had to get a job that was essential for the war effort. And he, at that time, he was working for Graver Tanks, and he just transferred over. And he started working for Texaco. And that's how he got bypassed the war. But he had 2 kids and he was older. I didn't see any sense of that. I can tell you one thing. We had one guy with us. He was 39 years old, and I don't know why they ever drafted him. Every place we came to, he'd dig a foxhole and sit there. And the only time he'd leave there is when it time to eat. So that's the kind of a guy he was. So, and I can't see. You got to be young and foolish to fight a war. So I worked at Texaco for a year, and Texaco paid very well, and it was shift work. You would run 365 days a year, and it was a job that I don't know how anybody could stand it. My brother did, but you changed every week. You changed. It was 8 to 4, 12 to 8, and 4 to 5, 4 to 8 to 5. So that you went around. So I went in there after I took my vacation. I said, I can't work here anymore. And the guy really tried to talk me out of it. And there's some good jobs there, but from the yard work, you would bid on a job that you liked. And then I operated with my brother out of the alky plant. And all you do is take tests, and it's a lot of work, but it's you're at a desk and you got to watch all the gauges. It's interesting because when you're playing with gasoline, that's what we made, 100 octane gasoline there, and it can blow up any minute because if you don't watch all the gauges, and especially in the wintertime when stuff freezes up and you have to put steam hoses and thaw out all these lines, it gets dangerous as heck in the wintertime, which is the worst time of years of work there. But it's interesting. You know, you work there 8 hours, and 8 hours goes pretty fast. The only bad part there for me was at 6, when I worked the midnight shift to 6 in the morning, or 8 in the morning, at 6 o'clock, I had to go to sleep. There was no other way. And they said, "You're going to get fired." I thought, I get fired, I get fired. And I'd find a place, and I'd tell them where I'd be. And they looked out for me, so it didn't matter much. So I'd sleep for about an hour, and then I'd feel better. So, but to get used to something like that, it's against your body. I couldn't stand it, so I quit there. And then I didn't have a job. But I had some money then, because I was saving it. And this job came up for the Philippines. And it was $9,000 a year, but you had to fulfill that $9,000. And so I went in as a hydraulic specialist. That's what I did. I took care of the hydraulics in the war. But I get there, and nothing was prepared. So we had to set up these shops to train the Filipinos. And the Philippine weather is 90 degrees at 10 in the morning and 90% humidity. And the only way you can fight it, there was no air conditioning at that time. What you do, you take a shower before breakfast, you take a shower before lunch, you take a shower before supper, and you took a shower before you went to bed. And that way, it's a cold shower. The hardest part is getting in there, but after it's in there, you feel good. And you can fight that weather. That's the only way you can fight it. And because you have sweat, and the sweat it doesn't smell because you washing it off all the time, and it makes you feel good to get that shower. So after that, Helen was waiting for me. She was working for a doctor. She got deferred. She would have had to put in 2 years in the service, but they didn't need her anymore after the war was over, so they just closed up shop. And he was waiting for me when I got home, and we got engaged, and we got married in 1948 at St. Anthony's Church, and it was Thanksgiving Day. And from the church, after we got married, we went over to the hotel, Louis Joliet Hotel, and had turkey dinner. Everybody in church went there, and it was nice. And then we celebrated it at our home at 607 South Alva Street, and which was our house was taken by Route 80, and that was a loss to us, because where you're born, I was born in that house, so I didn't feel bad until the house was gone, and then once it was gone, and the government didn't give us hardly any money, so for the house, they gave us we had 2 houses on that lot, and they gave us $12,000 for them, and you couldn't fight them, so the whole South End was that way, so. But we've had a good life. Married 67 years this Thanksgiving, and this is 2015, excuse me. 5 kids and grandkids. So, been a nice life. It's not over yet either. My father was 99, I want to beat him. 99 years, I want to beat him. So I got 6 more years to go, so at 100. I'll see you at 100. Bye now.